have to try to pull as much information as you can to get that information as accurate as possible. Yes?
So if all the data from third-party aggregators, if it's bad, then what does it say about, for example, like the audit infrastructure of commercial real estate? And are all these numbers just kind of built on like hearsay and a house of cards?
Well, let me clarify. It's not bad. It is kind of inaccurate. It's just not great. You know, the base information is there, and you can use that base information to draw conclusions. But again, there's data that's fact, and then there's data that's opinion. One thing, and don't want to get into politics, and I will say I look at everything as a real estate-tarian, not as a Republican or a Democrat. But you look at this whole Letitia James and Donald Trump thing about the value of real estate. I was just involved in a land arbitration, and there was two really great appraisers that were appraising this piece of land. Decades of experience. If you made a list of the top 5 appraisers in New York City, these two guys would be on over 90% of the lists, right? One came in with a value of this land for $310 million, the other $555 million. Because there's opinion that goes into it. So if you relied on the $555 million appraisal to do a transaction, are you all of a sudden going to get thrown in jail? It's somebody's opinion. You know, you say, I think the market for the lease space there is $70 a foot, and somebody's, no, I think it's 90. They both really could believe in their opinion. You give them a lie detector test, say, hey, I'm going to put a bullet in your head if you're lying. It could be 70 and 90. Right? It could be the way it is. So numbers, the most important thing about the data is it has to be correct. This is why when there was a guy, I won't say the name, but there was somebody that about 7, 8, 9 years ago wanted to create an index about office space so that landlords and tenants could hedge their risk relative to whether the office market was going to go up or go down or whatever. And as soon as I heard that, I said, there's no way that that can work. Why? Because you have big players that could manipulate that market. Vornado owns 20 million feet of space. They want to short the market. Okay, we're going to short the market and drop all our rents 10%. Easy to manipulate. Secondly, and more importantly, a square foot of space in SL Green's portfolio is a different size than a square foot of space in Vornado's portfolio. Right? How could you possibly index that? And these are things you have to take into consideration also. So you're figuring out the value of office buildings. Do you use gross square footage? Do you use rentable square footage? Do you use usable square footage? What do you use? If one day you use gross and one day you use rentable, again, the relationship between the numbers has completely gone out the window. What's right? Who knows? But I can tell you, no, 2 square feet are not identical because of the way that they're calculated. So the map room was designed to create the best quality information possible relative to the land market. So if somebody's thinking about selling land, anything they possibly could want to know, come into the map room. I can give you the historical information about this, and I can give you my opinion based upon all this data. And my opinion could be right, could be wrong, but I'm relying on more data than anybody else, so higher probability that it's right.
Can you talk about kind of on your team, how many people are going to be working on more of the sales side versus the using data side? So I feel like there's a lot of companies out there who say they're AI forward, technology forward, and they have maybe one in-house data scientist. So are you going to be doing a lot in-house or outsourcing?
Both. Well, I hired a COO who is an AI guy. We were doing some work together. I was going to use some of the stuff that he had developed. And one thing led to another, and I say, you know what, you got to come to the company, you shut your business down, and come do this with me. And he said, yeah. So I have Seth Samowitz is a great AI guy, but I've also been working on this, we're calling it the Knakal Land Index. I've been working on it for almost a year now. And I have 2 data scientists that I've hired outside, separate from the company, that are working on the algorithms for us. And it's interesting, we're comparing the fluctuations in land value to a whole bunch of different stuff, like within each, the things that you would expect within each of the different buckets. Like for residential rental land, we're looking at tax abatements, we're looking at the fluctuation in rents, and we're looking at 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, doorman, non-doorman, every type of apartment that you possibly could look at to see which of those is most highly correlated to fluctuations in land value. I'm thinking right now it's probably 2-bedroom, 2-bath rents are more highly correlated to fluctuation in land value than anything else. And vacancy and all that all the stuff that you would think, that should be looked at. But then we have a basket of macroeconomic factors that we're looking at also. Interest rates, lending rates, inflation, S&P 500, Dow Jones Industrial Average, price of gold, price of oil, consumer sentiment, everything under the sun. So if there's some relationship, if it turns out that when interest rates go down by 25 basis points and eggs go up by 15%, that land is going to take off, in 18 months, the models should be able to predict it. So I'm really, really curious to see what is going to come through this. And I think we're only a couple of months away from having this completed, so it's pretty cool stuff. Yes.
Hi, Bob. I just want to first say thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us. My name is Michelle Fair. I'm a senior. I'm studying psychology and business admin. And I just want to preface by saying I have very limited knowledge, so I'm sorry if my quick question sounds kind of stupid. But you mentioned kind of two parts. The first part is like during the pandemic, you said you would look at a lot of places. So what are like the attributes or factors you look into, like deciding between like a building permit or demolition permit, and how do you kind of decide if this is something worth investing in? And secondly, have you ever had a time where, like, I know you said you hide integrity in your data, but have you ever had a time where you didn't produce the right result, or you didn't, I guess, wasn't correct, and how do you kind of navigate that?
Right. Hell, great questions. I'll start with the second one. The one downside, or the weakness within what we're doing with the land index, is that there just aren't thousands of transactions. There's only 2,417 transactions for land deals that have happened in Manhattan, south of 96th Street, going back to 1985. So if you divide 2,700 by 2,400 by 40, it's not all that many, right? So that's problematic. And in some of the buckets, like recently, there's only been one office land deal done in each of the last 3 years. And location becomes very important. It's not perfect. In a perfect world, I'd like to have 10,000 transactions in each bucket for each year, but that just doesn't exist. So we're doing the best we can, and we'll try to extrapolate where we can and do the best we can to try to have the data come up with something meaningful. Now, again, if somebody said, all right, we're giving you $1 billion, Bob, we want you to invest it in land and do better than anybody else, I think this puts me in a position to probably do better. But the real benefit for me, don't forget, I'm a salesman. I'm not a data guy. I'm not a mathematician. I sell buildings. So I want to engage with people, build relationships with them, get them to hire me to sell their building and so on. If I have this data and folks understand what it is, don't you think developers are going to want to come sit with me and take a look at this and see what you can figure out? So that's going to be achieved regardless. Whether the data actually can be predictive or not, there's a number of factors that make it so it can't be. But I can tell you one thing, if there's anything that is insightful or predictive or that can come out of this, it's the best data set out there. We're developing the best models, and you know what? Our probability of success is higher than the next person, but still doesn't guarantee it because of the lack of a robust data set in a lot of cases. And I'm sorry, I forgot your first question.
So it's just about like how many there's a pandemic, like how do you decide?
It became clear when looking at a lot of these sites that there are folks who had gotten building permits 10 years ago, and the site is still sitting there. We said, just because you get a building permit doesn't mean you have to build. So much of it, the starting gun goes off when you get that construction loan, because then you're paying every single minute. You're paying interest. So you're not going to get a construction loan and just sit there and not do anything, right? So that's what flips something from pending to active. And then we looked at because going from active to completed, we said, what's the metric where very unlikely somebody's going to lose their building? Because again, not that we're being grave dancers, but if somebody's going to build something or start to build something and they're going to go belly up on it, I want to potentially get hired to sell that for either them or the bank or whoever's going to be in control. Once a rental apartment building is built and yet it's half rented, almost zero chance that the developer is going to lose that. Hotel, the same thing. Once the TCO is gotten, you could rent the whole hotel in a week. Maybe it's not going to perform well. Maybe it will then fall into default, but highly unlikely that's going to happen. Same thing with condo buildings. Generally, it's the last 20% of the sales in a condo or where the developer makes all their money. They have to sell 70 to 80% of it just to pay the debt off. So once you've paid 70% of it off, very unlikely you're going to lose it. So if we determine the metrics based on probability of that being an opportunity for us. Yes?
So you've been in the industry for quite some time. Obviously, you've been very successful. You've made a name for yourself and whatnot. I guess my question is, like, why start this company? Like, what's your reasoning behind it? Like, what's your why? Like, what drives you to do this?
I love it. I love it. I got very lucky. I was 1981. I'm a freshman at Wharton. Want to be the next Gordon Gekko like every single other Wharton kid. And I said, you know what? I have to get a summer job that's going to look good on my resume. I'm going to go get a job at an investment bank or a commercial bank. And I grew up in Bergen County, New Jersey. So drive around spring break, dropping my resume off at every commercial bank and investment bank I saw. Come out of a Payne Weber office in Hackensack. Across the hall, I see Coldwell Banker. I think the place is a bank. I go in, drop my resume off. Later that day, they call me. Say, hey, we'd like to interview you tomorrow. I set the interview up. I'm like, okay, great. I got one call. That's the only call I got. I go to the library the next morning. I see there's a real estate company. I'm like, oh, shit, I'm not going to get into real estate. They were the only ones who were hiring college kids for the summer. Took the job. Absolutely loved it. Went back my next 2 summers. Started with CB here in the city when I got out of school. I just love, for me, it's a job and it's a hobby. You know, I have a wife and a 15-year-old daughter. I love them more than anything in the world. I try to spend as much time as I can with them. But if they were going out of town on a girls' weekend, I'd be selling buildings all weekend, right? I go to the gym, I go to church, I spend time with my wife and daughter, and I sell buildings. That's my life. It's very simple. I absolutely love it. I think it's the coolest thing in the world. And I'm almost a little upset with myself that after the C&W years that I went to JLL, because I had to be at C&W. When you sell a service business, you're on a service contract for a period of time. So I had to be at C&W. But the big companies just zap your entrepreneurial spirit. You know, I knew intellectually when I got fired by JLL on February 14th, I felt like shit that day. Really felt bad. Although I knew intellectually, I said, you know what, this is a good thing for me. This is not a good place to be for me. And for a variety of reasons, it was great for me to get out of there. It still hurt. Nobody likes to be told we don't want you, right?
Yeah.
But the next morning I woke up and it was like this breath of fresh air, and I feel like a kid running through the hayfield on a sunny day, and I'm like, yeah, I can go, I could do anything. And it just, I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. Going back to the time I was a kid, my favorite days when I was growing up were snow days. And, you know, my mother always had to drag me out of bed to get to school. Snow days, I was out at 7 o'clock in the morning going around ringing doorbells, shuffling people's walks. And I'd be 10, 11 years old and make $300. Back in the 70s, that was a lot of money. $300 shuffling driveways and stuff. That was always part of who I was. So why did I do it? Because I love it. Because isn't this cool? Isn't this cool to talk about AI and land values? And that's the great thing about the business, is that you can be in a position where you are really an expert at something. It's such an industry full of mediocrity that it doesn't really take a lot to stand out. It takes focus. And I think within the brokerage business, the 3 things that I've seen, the qualities people have that get to the top of the business. Number 1, they're an expert at something. They pick a slice of the market that's small enough that they truly can know everything about it. Has to be big enough so that you can make a living doing it. You can't be the world's greatest expert on one tiny building. It has to be something big enough so you can make a great living, but small enough so that you can clearly define it, narrowly define it, know everything about it. And when you are that expert, you have all the power in the world. And your company needs you more than you need your company. You can go anywhere and be successful.
That's why did you specialize in AI? Because that was going to be my question.
Yeah, well, Manhattan and increasingly doing land. That's a whole nother conversation which I want to get into. I'll finish this thought and then I'll get to that because I think that one's interesting too. So number one, expertise. Number two, passion. You gotta love it. I tell young people all the time, expose yourself to as many aspects of real estate as possible. Find out what you like the most and just dive in. And you have to have the passion to love it because the market always has been cyclical, is cyclical, always will be cyclical. No matter how great you are, you're going to have tough times. It's that passion and love for the business that will get you through those tough times to be around for when the times get really good, which they inevitably will. And then the third thing is discipline. The real estate business is not rocket science, right? It's a lot of very, very, we call it blocking and tackling. A lot of things you have to do over and over and over again. And you have to have the discipline to do that, even when it seems like nothing might be working. I always use the stonecutter's creed. Stonecutter sitting in front of a big rock, has his mallet and bashes that rock and bashes that rock. Hit the thing 99 times, nothing's happened. Picks up the mallet, 100th blow, boom, rock splits in half. To the casual observer, they say, oh, that 100th one must have been different. You must use a different mallet, hit it harder, different angle. Stonecutter knows, no, it was the 99 that came before it that allowed that 100th one to work. And in the same way in the brokerage business, you have to do these very routine, mundane things over and over again. Make your calls, send your emails, send your hard mail, send your texts, go to networking events, be on social media, do all these things for market presence. And so that combination of those three things, the expertise, the passion, and the discipline, they increase greatly the probability of success. And everybody that I've seen that has done extraordinarily well in brokerage has had those three characteristics about it. So why Manhattan? Why land? And I'll tell you, when we started Knakal, it was based on a geographical approach to the business. Back in the 80s, publicly available information was very opaque and very inaccurate. So we decided we're going to put each broker in a small geographic area. And they're going to get to know more about that area than anybody else. How many buildings are there? What's the average turnover rate? The average price per square foot? The average cap rate? The new developments going on? Who's buying? Who's selling? Who owns the most buildings? Who owns the most square footage? Know everything about the neighborhood. And that worked really well because we'd go into a cellar and we'd only sold, I remember we were pitching a building on 58th Street, and we had only sold 3 buildings at the time. And the seller said to us, guys, you've only sold 3 buildings. Why would I hire you? I just met with Fred. Fred has been in the business 20 years. He said, look, Fred's great, but he doesn't know the market like we do. And the 3 buildings we sold, one was down the block, one was across the street, and one was right next door to you. We know this neighborhood better than anybody. We can be a better advocate for you in terms of convincing buyers why they should pay more for your building. We got hired. And so that approach really worked. Implementing that approach today in a world where publicly available information is so voluminous and you can go online, find out where somebody lives, their shoe size, anything about them, the geographic orientation is not nearly as important. Today, I think product specialization is more important, selling one type of building. As a broker, you have 2 main assets. You have your knowledge and your time. You're constantly growing your knowledge base. You can't make more time. You have to use time more effectively. So the way I explain it to folks is, let's say last week I sold an office building, a retail property, and an apartment building. And this week I'm pitching an apartment building. The owner of that building wants to hear everything about the apartment building I sold last week. Couldn't care less about the office building and the retail property. So 2/3 of the time I spent closing deals last week is not helping me today. If I had sold 3 apartment buildings last week and I'm pitching an apartment building this week, all of the time I spent last week was accretive towards getting this new assignment. And that's why I think product specialization is much more important today than it was years ago. So what I'm trying to do today, mostly land and mostly Manhattan.
So I have a really understanding what your company does is you offer the data, but at the same time, you can put together in the particular, whatever method you're using, you can put together the highest use of the land. Is that so?
Well, usually it's pretty obvious what the highest and best use would be, depending on location, size, etc. Sometimes it's not. Like, I sold a site for the Rockefeller Group at 150 West 48th Street a few years ago. And that was mixed-use zone, so it could be residential, could be hotel, could be office. And we had offers from developers from all three of those baskets. We didn't think residential would be the highest and best use there, but